Yeah, so I did a mentored postdoc with Klaus Schulten, was of course well known in the Blue Waters community. I was with him for 3 years, but for the past 2 years, I've been in sort of this independent postdoctoral position where I was funded to do research of my own design, independent of an academic advisor. And I was fortunate enough during this phase of my career to gain access to Blue Waters through both a broadening participation allocation and subsequently a Great Lakes Consortium for Petascale computation allocation. And access to this machine has been really essential for both enabling my science and driving my career forward. So I thought today I would tell you a little bit about my journey with Blue Waters, applying it as a computational microscope to study the hepatitis B virus capsid. So to be clear, I use Blue Waters to study the hepatitis B virus capsid as a drug target using all-atom molecular dynamics simulations. So hepatitis B virus, it causes severe liver disease like cirrhosis and cancer, and 250 million people worldwide are affected by this. There's a vaccine that can prevent the virus, but we don't have a cure for this population of people who already suffer from chronic infection. So we're really interested in developing new ways to inhibit the virus. And the capsid of the virus, which is depicted here kind of artistically on the right, is actually really attractive as a drug target. And the capsid is actually a protein shell at the center of the hepatitis B virus that wraps around the viral genome. And the capsid, in addition to protecting the genome, actually plays a functional role in delivering that genome to the host cell nucleus. So when the virus infects the cell, the capsid with the genome inside is what's actually released into the cytoplasm. And the capsid actually has ways to actually interact with the host cell machinery and hijack it and sort of trick it into helping it to facilitate infection. So here's an image of the capsid here. What's important to understand about this structure for the purpose of the talk is that it's composed of 120 capsid protein dimers that are arranged according to icosahedral symmetry. So this virus is actually an icosahedron. And because an icosahedron is symmetric, researchers have been leveraging this for years to determine crystal structures and cryo-EM structures of icosahedral viruses by averaging over all the symmetry operations to improve the resolution of their structures. The problem with this is that you get these highly idealized structures, and while this gives you some structural information, important structural information about the capsid, it gives you very little information about what the actual biophysical properties of the capsid are that underlie its ability to carry out its function. So our goal was to run an all-atom molecular dynamics simulation of this virus based on the crystal structure, the symmetric crystal structure. And one of the really exciting things that came out of this is we ran the capsid under native environmental conditions with an explicit solvent with physiological pH and physiological ion concentration. And we ran it without any constraints on the structure. There's no assumption of symmetry. There's no bias for the capsid to remain symmetric. So this was a really exciting opportunity to really explore how the capsid moves, what are its dynamics like, does it deviate from a symmetric structure. And when we finished putting together this simulation model, when we include all the explicit water and ions and everything, we get a system of about 6 million atoms. And we were interested in exploring it on the microsecond time scale. So the answer to the question, why Blue Waters, is that this was actually a rather expensive calculation, and at the time was really the only machine that would allow us to do this type of study. And what was cool is we learned actually a lot about how asymmetric and how flexible the capsid really is. And one demonstration of that is if we look at the root mean square fluctuation of all of the protein atoms, sort of how much they fluctuate around an average position. We can learn something about the flexibility. And what you see in this map is the RMSF tells us that the spikes of the capsid are actually really flexible, and that there are some areas of intermediate flexibility sort of on the capsid surface. What's interesting about this figure is that one might expect you to be able to correlate sort of this red and white regions of flexibility to the actual symmetric regions on the capsid structure. For example, pentamers, which are highlighted with a little star, maybe they would be more rigid and red, and hexamers in between them might be less flexible and white. But because we can't see any sort of pattern in this on the capsid structure, what this tells us is over the course of our microsecond simulation, the dynamics that we've sampled actually are not averaging out to give us a symmetric structure. And that's actually really exciting to observe. Another way to look at that is if we measure the length across the capsid between icosahedral vertices, we can see that some of them are sort of squishing in, another is sort of expanding out. All sorts of other exciting things are going on at the same time. The dynamics are really complex. And if we look at the collective motions of the capsid, or sort of the overarching themes of the dynamics that come out from the conformational ensemble we've sampled, we can see a clear ability of this virus capsid to distort asymmetrically. Why that's so exciting is researchers have thought for years that the virus capsid might actually need to be able to distort asymmetrically to carry out its function. So actually when the capsid assembles, it assembles to encapsulate RNA. But then the RNA must mature to DNA inside the capsid. So the DNA is actually both larger and more rigid than the original RNA. So it might be that upon maturation, the capsid has to be able to withstand unevenly distributed internal strain upon its inside. And so the ability that we see of the capsid to distort just under equilibrium conditions without any external stress on it supports the idea that the capsid could actually do this as part of the maturation process. And why we care about that is because if this is something that the capsid actually must do as part of the viral life cycle, if we could design some kind of drug that would lock the capsid and prevent this distortion from occurring, this might be a new strategy for treatment. Something else we can do when we look at these all-atom molecular dynamics simulations is actually look at what the solvent is doing in addition to the solute itself, and how the capsid is actually influencing its surrounding environment. And something really cool we were able to observe is that the capsid selectively translocates ions across its surface, and it translocates sodium actually 5 times faster than chloride. So if you watch this movie, you can see that for all the ions that started out inside the capsid, if we watch them sort of start to percolate out as the capsid equilibrates, you see more yellow ions coming out than blue ions. Those are the sodiums. And that's interesting because actually the capsid has these little terminal tails, so like the terminal peptides of each of these capsid proteins are expected to actually have to display themselves on the capsid exterior at key moments in the viral life cycle to signal interaction with the host cell. And the terminals are actually highly positively charged. And it's unclear actually where the terminals might come out, but because we find that all this sodium translocation appears to be occurring actually in these triangular shaped pores at the interfaces of capsid pentamers and hexamers instead of the centers of pentamers and hexamers, we think we've identified the location that this occurs. And these black spheres are actually 14 negatively charged amino acids around each pore. So chemically this makes some sense. Why this is important is if this is actually the location that these terminals must extrude to display cellular signals to help the capsid hijack the host cell machinery, then this is the pore we would need to block with a drug to prevent this from happening, and might also represent another strategy for targeting the hepatitis B virus with a new therapeutic. So moving forward, we're actually running simulations of the capsid with drugs bound, and these are drugs that are known to disrupt the capsid structure in vitro. And some of my very first work on the capsid involved running short simulations of an apoform and a drug-bound capsid, and showing that when drugs are bound, that they actually disrupt the morphology of the capsid. They cause the icosahedral vertices to protrude, the icosahedral faces to flatten, and for the whole capsid to come more like a regular icosahedron. And what's pretty neat is since then, my experimental collaborators were able to isolate classes from their cryo-EM studies to show that apoform capsids are roughly spherical, and drug-bound capsids actually have these facets that we predicted with the MD simulations. So it's clear that our simulations have strong predictive power. We're looking at a whole range of drugs binding now different classes, and experimenting with which types of quasi-equivalent binding sites the drugs are present in. Each type of drug has this type of effect on the capsid that it affects the morphology and makes it more like a regular icosahedron, but all to different extents depending on what the drug is and where the drugs are bound. I think something cool that's come out of this drug-bound capsid work actually started with an email that my collaborator sent me. And he's like, Jodi, I have a problem. I have this mutation I'm doing, and the mutation both enhances capsid assembly and increases drug resistance, but I don't understand why, because when I look at the experimental structure, the residue I'm mutating doesn't participate in any of the subunit interfaces, so I don't understand why it would affect assembly. And the residue I'm mutating is at the mouth of the drug binding pocket and not inside of it, so I don't understand why it would increase drug resistance. Can you use your computational microscope and zoom in and help me figure out what's happening? And so in fact, I found that the residue that my collaborator was mutating, this 3NE109, was actually capable of forming a hydrophobic contact with the neighboring subunit. So this would explain its involvement in assembly. Furthermore, when this interaction is in place, it can physically block the drug binding pocket. So this would also explain why this residue would be involved in drug resistance. What was most interesting, I thought, about this data was that this interaction was in place far more of the time in the quasi-equivalent C binding pocket than the B binding pocket. So I wanted to explore this a little bit further. So I played around with running simulations where drugs are either in B pockets or C pockets or both. And this is, again, the apiform capsid data. And what this says to me is that for a significant portion of the time, the C pocket is essentially wedged closed where the interaction is in place and it's blocked. And the B pocket is relatively open, which would mean drug binding in the B pocket is more likely. So if we run a simulation with drugs only in the B pocket, what we find is that the C pocket opens, and that binding a drug in B pocket would make binding in C actually more likely. Conversely, if we have drugs in the C pocket wedges open, this actually decreases the likelihood that drugs will then bind in the B pocket. When drugs are in both pockets are essentially wedged open. But what this shows is that some of this experimental evidence that we've seen that drug uptake of these capsids is cooperative, we now have identified a structural mechanism for this, which is actually really exciting. And since I'm almost out of time, I'm just going to go ahead and acknowledge the fantastic experimental collaborators I've had over the course of, was that 15 minutes or 20? Oh, well, we'll finish early. I have this one more slide, which I think is something cool that came out of this work. As you can see with the sort of previous two slides, or previous few slides, that the MD simulations can both show us things that are absolutely inaccessible to experiment and are furthermore have been really important to helping us interpret experimental findings. So I thought this was something neat that came out that tells us a little bit more about helping us interpret the things we see from experiments based on what the simulation gives us. So what this is we decided to explore how the flexibility of the capsid and how this diverse conformational ensemble it exhibits would affect the resolution that people obtain when they get these experimental structures. And so what we did here in panel A is we extracted a single frame from the MD simulation, and we back calculated a density map similar to what you would obtain from doing cryo-EM. And you can see the map has a atomistic resolution because all the atoms were there in the structure we used to calculate the map. Now if we extract 1,000 of those structures over the course of the simulation and average them, analogous to what is done in these single particle reconstructions in cryo-EM, you can see even visually that a lot of the resolution is lost and it just becomes smeared out. If we apply icosahedral averaging, which is also common in determination of these structures, you see you lose even more resolution. The resolution of the map pictured here is about 2.5 angstroms. The best resolution that's been obtained for any experimental structure for the hepatitis B virus capsid so far is about 3.5 angstroms. And so what this little study showed us is that in the absence of experimental error, when we can do things like align even very accurately, that we already lose so much resolution just due to how flexible the capsid is, and that we're averaging over conformations that are all just a little bit different because of how flexible the capsid actually is. And we think this is why that nobody's been able to obtain a really high resolution structure of the capsid and may never be able to. It's just too flexible. And this is something to consider for other systems that may be very flexible, that no matter what kind of new technology comes out of this resolution revolution that the cryo-EM field is seeing, it may never be capable of obtaining atomistic structures, fully atomistic resolution structures for some systems just because they're so flexible. So with that, I will thank all the fantastic experimental collaborators, as well as some other computational collaborators that I've been fortunate enough to work with over the years, as well as the Blue Waters time I've been able to get that, again, has been really essential in doing this project. Thank you.